Today, we are on site at McCormick Place in Chicago at the 2019 ASCO Annual Meeting. We'll be recapping some of the top news presented each day during the conference, and soon we will speak with Dr. Leora on the pivotal lung cancer updates being presented, and Dr. Elizabeth Plimack on intriguing data in genitourinary cancers. Welcome to OncLive News Network. I'm Gina Columbus. Findings presented at the meeting show that a broader set of clinical trial eligibility criteria proposed by ASCO and Friends of Cancer Research would nearly double the number of patients with advanced non-small cell lung cancer who are available for enrollment. In ASCO's Cancer Link database, investigators found that under expedited criteria, 98.5% of patients would be accepted for advanced NSCLC trials versus 52.3% under traditional criteria. In colorectal cancer, the long-term survival rates for those with liver metastases were similar regardless of whether patients underwent laparoscopic or open liver surgery. Results had showed that the median overall survival in the laparoscopic surgery arm was 80 months compared with 81 months in those who underwent open heart surgery. The antibody-drug conjugate enfortumab vedotin led to a 44% overall response rate and a median overall survival of 11.7 months in patients with locally advanced or metastatic urothelial carcinoma in a single-arm, two-cohort trial. The FDA granted a breakthrough therapy designation to enfortumab vedotin for this patient population that has progressed during or following checkpoint inhibition based on phase 1 data. The Society of Gynecologic Oncology released a study showing that more than 70% of female gynecologic oncologists in the United States and more than half of male practitioners have experienced sexual harassment either in clinic or practice. Women were found to be more likely to report harassment, which was not statistically significant, and 40% of responders did not report incidents to officials because it did not seem important enough to them. In EGFR mutant non-small cell lung cancer, results of the RELAY trial showed that the frontline combination of ramucirumab plus erlotinib improved progression-free survival compared with ramucirumab and placebo in EGFR mutant metastatic NSCLC. Moreover, the safety findings were consistent with the established tolerability profiles of each agent alone. Single-agent olaparib had a significant and clinically relevant improvement in overall survival in patients with germline BRCA mutant platinum-sensitive relapsed ovarian cancer. All patients who received the PARP inhibitor alone had a significant clinically relevant improvement in overall response rate and progression-free survival, compared with chemotherapy of physician's choice. No new safety signals were identified. For a full review of all of these studies, please visit OncLive.com. Here now to discuss the latest findings in lung cancer is Dr. Leora, who is the Associate Professor of Medicine and Assistant Vice Chairman for Faculty Development and Director of Thoracic Oncology Research Program at Vanderbilt Ingram Cancer Center. Hi, Dr. Horn. Thank you so much for coming here and chatting with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. So there have been more long-term follow-up data of the available agents in lung cancer that we've seen this year. Can you discuss the 5-year overall survival data from the Keynote 001 trial?
Sure. So the Keynote 001 study, as you recall, it's a large 550 patient study that looked at pembrolizumab as a single agent in patients. It looked at a first-line cohort, a second-line cohort, third-line cohort. It also looked at patients who are PD-L1 positive as well as patients who are PD-L1 negative. And what we saw at ASCO this year was the 5-year survival data that showed in an all-comer patient population, the overall survival was around 15%. And in the patients who are PD-L1 positive, the overall survival was 23%. That data sort of mirrors what we saw last year at AACR with the Checkmate 003 data, which also showed with nivolumab as a single agent in an all-comer patient population, smaller numbers, it was just over 100 lung cancer patients, that the 5-year overall survival was 16%. So what that tells us is these drugs, when they do work, they're having a durability in a small subset of patients. So they're not working in everybody, but it is a step forward, because when I first started practicing, the median survival for stage 1 to stage 4 lung cancer was 15% at 5 years. And so now we've got a cohort of stage 4 lung cancer patients who are surviving. Overall survival at 5 years is 15%. So we're making some progress, but it would be nice to see if we could bump that even further.
Definitely. Now we also have 3-year overall survival data from the Pacific trial looking at durvalumab in stage 3 non-small cell lung cancer. So what are your thoughts on these follow-up?
So the data is encouraging. I think that it gives us even more encouragement to use durvalumab in patients after concurrent chemoradiation therapy. The majority of patients with stage 3 disease will recur in the first few years after therapy. So when we're seeing this 3-year overall survival data that is clearly a separation between placebo and durvalumab, we clearly have a drug that is active, that is helping us cure more lung cancer patients, because in that stage 3 setting, we're looking for cure, not just prolonging progression-free survival. And so I think it's really encouraging data, and durvalumab has become a standard of care in the US for all patients after concurrent chemoradiation therapy, and in Europe it's for patients who are PD-L1 score greater than 1% or higher.
So now the Relay trial is another one that is getting a little bit of buzz here. So this is looking at the frontline combination of ramucirumab and erlotinib in EGFR mutant non-small cell lung cancer. So what do you think are a couple of important things to note about this combination?
So I think there are two things. It shows us that when you combine an EGFR inhibitor and a VEGF inhibitor, you have increased efficacy compared to the EGFR inhibitor alone. We saw that a couple years ago at ASCO with the Japanese trial that looked at erlotinib plus bevacizumab. We've seen it with the ECOG trial that Tom Stinchcombe led, looking at erlotinib plus bevacizumab. And we've seen it now as well with the erlotinib plus ramucirumab. I think there are important factors, though, that we need to think about is we're combining an oral drug with an IV agent, so it's patient factors of, do you want to bring your patient into the hospital to get an IV drug when they could just be at home and see you every few months instead of every 3 weeks? We also see a lot more toxicity when you're adding a VEGF agent to an EGFR TKI. There's the hypertension, there's proteinuria, and there's some of the other toxicities that these agents, when you combine, can have. And we also need to put this trial into context with first-line osimertinib. The progression-free survival on osimertinib alone was 18 months. And so unless we're seeing like a dramatic improvement in progression-free survival, I'm not sure that this is a regimen that I'm going to adopt at my institution. There are some ongoing trials. So Helena Yu is leading a study looking at osimertinib and ramucirumab in patients who are EGFR mutant positive compared to osimertinib alone. And so it still gives us some pause for thought. And then we also saw the study at ASCO this year looking at gefitinib and chemotherapy in the EGFR mutant patient population. I think the biggest thing we know for these patients is the targeted therapies don't work forever. And unlike when a checkpoint inhibitor works, we're going to see durable responses. These patients will eventually progress on their targeted therapy, and so how can we maximize their time and minimize their toxicity on those therapies?
Those are some really great points. The safety is obviously very important to talk about. Now, speaking of targeted therapies, what are some other agents that we've seen get some discussion here at ASCO, especially with some of these more less common molecular abnormalities?
Yeah, so I think from ASCO, the take-home point is you should be testing, and you probably should be testing everybody. Testing everybody because of the MET exon 14 skipping mutation, which we know from 2 abstracts today with tepotinib and capmatinib that MET exon 14 can occur in squamous. It can occur commonly in smokers, and there are now 2 active agents. They're both in clinical trials, but there are 2 agents that we're seeing 50+% response rates. With tepotinib, we saw a progression-free survival approaching a year. And with capmatinib as well, a drug that's really active in the CNS. We don't have that data yet with tepotinib. The toxicities of these drugs seem to be a class effect, so edema seemed to be in both classes, but we saw that with crizotinib as well, which we know is a MET drug, although it's got approval in other indications. So patients should be tested for the MET exon 14 skipping mutation, because I think that these drugs will eventually become available, and if not, at least get your patients to a center that has a clinical trial. We also saw really great data with the Blue 667 drug in patients with RET fusions, highly active, over 70% response rate, really good toxicity profile, and a durable progression-free survival. Now, patients who are RET positive seem to be closer to what we see with the EGFR, ALK, the ROS1, more commonly the younger never smokers, but nevertheless, if you don't test for it, you won't know that you have active drugs for your patients. So I think more to come for targeted therapy for another cohort of patients.
Definitely.
No, go ahead. Can I add one other?
Yeah.
I think the other interesting data that was not presented at a lung session, but it was in developmental therapeutics, but we finally may have a drug for patients who are KRAS positive. Amgen had a drug, AMG 501, that showed some nice activity in that cohort of patients. Still early clinical trials. I'm looking forward to opening that trial at our institution, but we've never had a drug for patients who are KRAS positive, so hopefully this is something new for patients who have the G12C mutation.
Definitely, that's really exciting. Now, what are your thoughts on some of the advances in small cell lung cancer? We've also seen some data with lurbinectedin here at this year's meeting.
Yeah, so small cell I think was a little bit thinner at ASCO this year. We did see encouraging data with lurbinectedin in the phase 2 study with a 35% response rate. I think we need to wait for the phase 3 because often a phase 2 looks really promising and the phase 3 data is not as promising. I think that the difficult part is, was mentioned in the discussion yesterday by Dr. Bess about lurbinectedin, is the fact that in the phase 3 data it's combined with an anthracycline, and we know that it's often a little bit difficult to give doxorubicin in patients with small cell lung cancer because of their comorbid disease and cardiac function, but it does look like an active agent, and hopefully it will become something that's available in the second line setting for patients who progressed on platinum etoposide.
Well, Dr. Horn, thank you so much for coming here today and chatting with us about everything that's going on in lung cancer. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Sure, thanks. Next, we sit down with Dr. Elizabeth Plimack, who's the Division Chief of Medical Oncology at Fox Chase Cancer Center, who's going to chat with us about some genitourinary cancer studies being presented at the ASCO Annual Meeting this year. Hi, Dr. Plimack. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So, N42 vedotin is a really exciting study that's being presented this year. Could you talk to us a little bit about those data and what's really significant about them?
Sure. So the data presented this morning by Dr. Petrolak was a single arm experience of enfortumab vedotin. The majority of patients were pretreated with both platinum and a checkpoint inhibitor. So we're talking third line space. Right now our standard there is single agent chemotherapy. So these data showed a 44% response rate. The waterfall plots were really impressive when they went up on the screen. We're seeing a nice deep response in most patients. I think what we don't know is how that is going to compare to chemotherapy in the phase 3 trial that's ongoing. So I'm sure this will be slated for accelerated approval and has a good chance of getting that, but until we complete the phase 3 trial, we really won't know how it performs versus chemotherapy. I will say enfortumab vedotin is similar to chemotherapy in that it's an antibody drug conjugate targeted to a chemotype toxin. So in some ways it's similar, but it does seem to work a lot better. And the toxicities are there and well described, but we're getting experience with them and they should be manageable.
Those are some great points.
Yeah.
Now, erdafitinib is an agent that was recently granted FDA approval in bladder cancer. So what kind of impact does this agent bring to the table?
Right, so erdafitinib is really exciting for us because it's the first targeted therapy to a specific alteration in the tumor that we've had in bladder cancer. And we've been poised for this because bladder cancer is full of mutations and alterations, but really targeting FGFR3 has been fruitful, and erdafitinib was approved on that basis. So the problem is FGFR3 is really only present in the way it needs to be for the drug to work in about 10% or a few more of our patients. So it's now brought molecular testing into the forefront. I think this probably is and should be standard of care for bladder cancer patients so that we know if erdafitinib is an option for them down the road after platinum and checkpoint.
Good. Now, what are some other bladder cancer abstracts that are being presented this year that you're really excited about?
Right, so there was some interesting data around neoadjuvant chemotherapy in bladder cancer. The Coxin trial was presented. Unfortunately, the Coxin algorithm was not predictive, so won't probably move into clinical practice. But we learned a lot about neoadjuvant chemotherapy in the current era, and I think we're poised to do more biomarker studies based on that. There were some poster updates of long-term outcomes from nivolumab and pembrolizumab in bladder cancer that I would encourage people to pull up as part of the program, because the long-term data are really what we're excited about with these agents in bladder. And so even though they're updates of updates, kudos to the authors that they continue to show us that there are still patients getting durable responses from these drugs, which is what we were hoping to see.
Definitely, and that long-term follow-up is super important to know.
Yes, absolutely, it's what matters.
Yes. So now moving on to renal cell carcinoma, what are some other big trials in this space that are being presented?
So one of the biggest trials this year was obviously the Keynote 426 study and the Javelin study. Those are similar trials combining frontline immunotherapy with axitinib, which is the combinable VEGF inhibitor. So I'll speak mostly to axitinib and pembrolizumab because those data updates were presented this morning. And those really described what we sort of put out there in this presentation was the depth of response. So the response rate was previously reported, the hazard ratio of 0.53 for overall survival at the first interim analysis. All of this was really welcome news to us in the kidney cancer community. But what we saw with the updates of the waterfall plots is that very few patients had their tumors grow at all on this treatment. 94% of patients saw tumor shrinkage, some quite deep. So what everyone's waiting to see, and again, this will take time and gets back to the long-term follow-up, which we'll probably see in poster sessions years from now, is are these durable are these patients going to live longer, ongoing, and can some of them stop treatment and be cautiously considered cured?
Right.
We don't know the answer to that yet.
Okay. Now, looking at all these data, combining the bladder cancer studies, the RCC studies, what does the future of GU cancer treatment look like now going forward the next few years?
Right. So I think, immunotherapy has revolutionized how we treat both these diseases in different ways. We still lean on the standards we had before in bladder cancer, cisplatin-based chemotherapy, in kidney cancer, VEGF TKIs, and we're learning that how to combine them and sequence them. But we still really need novel agents. And to that extent, some of the most exciting stuff, and it's too soon to really talk about, but that we see at the meeting in developmental therapeutics and other areas, are sort of drugs to watch. So one drug to watch is the PT2977 drug, recently acquired by Merck. It's a HIF-2 alpha inhibitor. Data weren't at this meeting, but were presented earlier at a European meeting. These are going to percolate up and I think make an impact. The Immuno-132 agent in bladder cancer, again, not presented in an oral session here, but one to watch in bladder based on early data. So we still need new agents, we still need new approaches, and we hope that future ASCOs will be seeing phase 3 trials of those drugs turn positive.
That's great. Well, Dr. Plimack, thank you so much for coming here today and chatting with us about all that's happening in RCC and bladder cancer.
Times. Thanks for having me.
Sure, thanks.
Thanks.
And don't forget, the OncLive Global Expo is taking place October 11th through 13th in Orlando, Florida. Join us for a fully interactive meeting that brings together the most inclusive group of oncology professionals to collaborate on emerging trends and technologies in oncology care and research. Thank you for watching OncLive News Network. I'm Gina Columbus.